Jens Soering knew details about the crime scene that only the real killer would know, and that proves he's guilty. I hear that once in a while these days, and that's what this video is about. Details that only the real killer would know, mistakes in my false confession, and a fact check. But before we get into the heart of the matter, I need to give you a kind of a trigger warning. This video includes a lot of photographs showing the crime scene, so there's a lot of blood and horrible things to look at. So if that sort of material shocks you or could trigger you, please don't watch this video. It's not for you. And if you're under 18, you should also not watch this video, okay? And now let's deal with the subject matter. Fact is, yes, my confession included details that only the real killer would know. But no, that does not mean I'm guilty. I learned those details from the real killer. In the night of the crime, she returned to me in the hotel room, told me about it, and then we spent hours together inventing a false confession that included these accurate details in order to make it persuasive so that the police would believe that I committed the crime, even though in reality I had not. And that's exactly the way it went down. More than a year later, after our arrest, I gave a false confession that included all of these accurate details. And in fact, it apparently persuaded the police that I was the killer, even though I was not. Again, yes, I had details about the crime scene that only the real killer would know, but no, I'm not the killer. I just spoke with the real killer. That's all. Now let's look at all the different mistakes in my confession. And as you listen to these mistakes, you should ask yourself, would the real killer have made these mistakes? Or is not a much more likely explanation that Jens Soering is not the real killer and the whole story is a pack of lies? That's actually what happened. I invented all of this, and the reason why my confession, which contains accurate details, contains so many inaccurate details is because I was not actually at the crime scene, hence the mistakes in my confession. But that's something you can decide. Would the real killer have made these mistakes in his confession? That's the question for you to answer. Let's start with the first mistake I made, and that's the clothing of one of the victims, Nancy Haysom. Here you see a page from the transcript where I say she wore jeans. By the way, all of this is linked up below because, folks, that's how you do a real fact check. You actually provide the documents. That's how you do it when you're grown up. After this page from the transcript, I'm going to show you a picture from the crime scene, and you can see this is Nancy Haysom, and you can see that she's not wearing jeans. She's wearing a morning coat, a house coat, blue house coat with flowers on it. Clearly not jeans. And that's a mistake. Is that a mistake the real killer would have made? There's two things to consider because this is actually two mistakes in one. The first is that this is a house coat. We are now 21st century, okay? But this happened in 1985, 37 years ago at the date I'm making this video, and things were different back then. I had met Derek and Nancy Haysom one single time for a lunch that was about 30 to 45 minutes long. I was basically a stranger to them. And then supposedly 6 to 8 weeks later, I show up in the middle of the night on a Saturday night, knocking on their door, wanting to come in. Would Nancy Haysom have entertained a guest whom she did not know, whom she had met only one single time for a lunch 2 months earlier, wearing only a house coat? Not in 1985. In 1985, she would have gotten properly dressed. That's what it was like back then. And you don't entertain strangers in a house coat. You just don't. The fact that she wore a house coat suggests very, very strongly that she knew her guest, who turned out to be a killer, and that she knew her guest very well. It was either a close friend or a member of her family. That's what that house coat suggests. So that's the first mistake associated with a house coat. And the second mistake is this. Now, decades later, some people say that I could have been in shock or drunk, and that's why I don't remember it properly. That's why I made this mistake. But folks, that doesn't make sense. According to my confession, again, a false confession, but according to my confession, I spent about half an hour with the victims, first arriving, then having a drink with them, and then eating with them. Half an hour, during which I was not yet drunk and during which I was not yet in shock from allegedly committing murder. Half an hour is a long time to spend with somebody, socializing, talking, drinking, eating, and not knowing what they're wearing. So this theory that I got confused because I was drunk and mad with killer lust or something just doesn't fly. It just doesn't fly. It doesn't make sense, given the confession itself, which was a false confession, but the story I told doesn't make that possible, because I drank with these folks and ate with these folks before I allegedly killed them, according to this false confession. So that's the first mistake. The second mistake is the seating position at the table. Now here you see another page from the transcript where it says that I sat with a back to the window looking over the backyard. And here's a photograph, and you can see the window in the photograph, and here's the reverse angle, and you can see that the place setting where I supposedly was supposed to sit is empty. There's a place sitting at the head of the table where Derek Haysom supposedly sat, and there's a place sitting on the other side of the table where Nancy Haysom supposedly sat, according to the trial transcript that you just looked at. So again, clearly, the photograph of the crime scene does not match the story I told the police. Next mistake. Here you see the page from the transcript. I said that I got up and tried to leave, and Derek got up and pushed me against the wall, and I bumped my head. That's not possible. Please take a look at this picture. You can see there is a chest in front of the wall. You cannot be pushed up against that wall. It's blocked by the chest. Here is another photograph where I've sketched it in blue so you can see it more clearly. And then there's a third photograph with a close-up so you can see where the chest is. It blocks the wall. It is not possible to push somebody up against that wall. And now, decades later, some people say, okay, maybe he wasn't pushed up against the wall. Maybe he was pushed up against the window. But does that make sense? Look at the curtains on the window. Those curtains are not disturbed, and the window isn't broken. And in addition to that, that's not what I said. I didn't say I got pushed up against the window. I said I got pushed up against the wall. And since that isn't possible, people are now changing around my confession and saying, well, maybe it was the window. Another version that they're now putting out is, well, maybe it was the fireplace mantle. Again, I didn't say I got pushed up against the fireplace mantle. I said I got pushed up against the wall. But then let's look at the fireplace mantle. That's not possible physically because the table is so close to the fireplace, it's not possible to push somebody up against that. The next thing is, compare the back of the chair with the height of the fireplace mantle. You can see the fireplace mantle is only about here on a grown-up man. So it's not possible to bump your head there. It's just not. It's too low. And even if it were possible, look at what's on top of the fireplace mantle. There are all these cards there. Somebody put that up there for decoration. The Haysoms presumably did. But those cards haven't been knocked down. So if I had been pushed up against the fireplace mantle, those cards would have been on the floor. And they're not. Again, it's not what I said. I said I got pushed up against the wall, and all these theories about being pushed up against the window or being pushed up against the fireplace mantle are being invented now, decades later, once people have figured out, oh, gee, there's a chest blocking the wall, and it's not actually possible to push somebody up against the wall. The next mistake in my false confession is the injury inflicted on Derek Haysom and what that led to. Here's the page from the transcript, and it's an awful passage. I say that I stepped up behind Derek Haysom and cut him on the neck, and then I watched all the blood flowing into his lap, and it was really shocking. That's what I say. It's a lot of blood flowed down. That's a horrible thing, okay? It's a horrible thing. But in this video, we're not talking about how horrible it is, and it is. We're talking about whether that statement matches what was found at the crime scene. Is that statement even true? And I think we can say with high likelihood it's not true. Let's take a look at the photograph again. I said that a lot of blood poured into Derek Haysom's lap. But look at the chair. The seat of the chair is perfectly white. There's no blood there. If all that blood had flowed into his lap, the seat of that chair should have been covered with blood. And then look at the floor directly in front of the chair. Not to the side, in front of the chair. There's no blood on the floor. There's a lot of blood in front of the table to the side, but in front of the chair, where the blood should have been if Derek Haysom's throat had been cut while he was sitting there, there's no blood there. There's no blood there on the floor. And there's no blood in the chair. Not true. Here's another angle, a different photograph, and you can see that there are some sneaker prints, bloody sneaker prints, between the chair and the table. And those sneaker prints were not left by Derek Haysom because these are Derek Haysom's shoes. So that suggests to me that somebody wearing sneakers was actually sitting in that chair and not Derek Haysom, because then we would have had moccasin prints there. So the facts of the crime scene don't match what I told the police. Can't be true. What happened next? In my false confession, take a look at the transcript. Allegedly, Nancy Haysom rushed at me with a knife, and then we spent a long time fighting very violently there at the table. It was a struggle for life and death between three people, a horrible situation, life and death fight. Is that true? Here is a close-up of Nancy Hasten's place setting, and you can see there's a knife still lying on the table. So this story that she grabbed a knife out of the kitchen and came at me with this knife is not true. The knife's still on the table and it's not been used. The next thing to look at is the surface of the table. Look at what's standing there. 2 candlesticks standing upright and a wine glass standing upright. And again, look at the cards on the top of the mantle of the fireplace. If there had been a life and death fight between 3 people there, those 3 people would have been bumping up against that table, and those candlesticks would have fallen over, and the wine glass would have fallen over, and probably those cards at the top of the mantle would have all been knocked down. But it's not what happened. There was no big fight there. The table is much too neat for that. You can look at the blood on the floor, and something happened there in front of that table because a lot of blood got wiped. It's gruesome. But whatever did happen there was not a life or death fight, because that would have been all knocked around much more than it was. Let's go to the next mistake. The police asked me to draw a sketch of where the bodies were, and I did that. Here you can see the sketch. And that does not match what was at the crime scene. Here's a sketch of Derek Hasten's actual position in the living room, police sketch. And now here are the 2 next to each other. On the left-hand side is what I drew for the police, and from the right-hand side is where Derek was actually found. And you can see in my sketch, Derek Hasten's body was horizontal, sort of half in the dining room and half in the living room. And in reality, he was entirely in the living room and he was vertical. Same general area, different room, different position. Would the real killer have made that kind of mistake? That's something only you can decide. Another mistake. I said I turned the outside lights off when I left. Here's the page from the trial transcript. But that's not what the police found when they got there. Here is another page from the transcript where another different police officer is speaking, and he says that when he got to the crime scene, all the outside lights were on. And he was the first investigator who got to the crime scene. There was already like a uniformed cop there, but he was the first investigator who came to the crime scene, and he saw that the lights were on, even though I said I'd turned them off. My statement does not match what was found at the crime scene. Is that a mistake the real killer would have made? You decide. Now, a lot of these things that I've talked about here could be considered a matter of opinion. I don't think so, but some people might consider them a matter of opinion. Now I want to talk about some things that are not a matter of opinion. They're forensics. These are just facts, and you can't really argue with them. But it's really interesting stuff, so hold on. The ride is going to get rough. I told the police a story with 3 people in it. Myself, and Derek Hasten, and Nancy Hasten. So, the police should have found 3 blood groups at the crime scene, but they did not. They found 4 blood groups at the crime scene, suggesting 2 killers. I have attached the forensic report, this is the serology report, the blood group report from 1985 on another video separately on DNA tests. Here, I'm just going to show you the actual results that the forensic scientist Mary Jane Burton found. On this page, you see blood of the blood groups A and B. And on this page, you see blood of the blood group O. And on this page as well, blood group O. And then on the final page, you see blood of the blood group B. 4 blood groups at the crime scene. But my story only had 3 people in it. Does not match, folks. Does not match. Next thing, take a look at this photograph. That's a photo of the shower at the crime scene. It's glowing blue because it's been sprayed with luminol. Luminol is a chemical that reacts with blood, and then when you shine an ultraviolet light on it, it glows blue. And it's very, very sensitive. Even months later, after repeated washings, luminol will still pick up blood. It's that sensitive. Even blood that you can't see with the naked eye, luminol will find it. But if it's glowing that strongly, there's that much blue, that means there's a lot of blood. And this tells you that the killer took a shower afterwards and washed off blood at the crime scene. Now, here's something really strange about this. My confession does not mention taking a shower anywhere at all. But if I had been at the crime scene, wouldn't I have known that I took a shower? And why not tell the police about it? I had just confessed to double murder. It can't get any worse than that. If you're confessing to double murder, you may as well confess to taking a shower. What the heck, right? But my confession doesn't mention a shower. Because I did not know. Because I was not there. This is a detail about the crime scene that only the real perpetrator would know. But I did not know it. And that is why it didn't show up in my confession, my false confession. Luminol again. Here you see a page from the transcript where I talk about wearing bloody clothes when I entered the car. Here's another page from the transcript. And here's where I talk about how my hand was bleeding in the car from where I allegedly injured myself. If that had been true, then there should have been blood found in the car, but it was not. That car was luminol tested and there was no blood found. That's not me saying it. That is the original lead investigator in this case, Chuck Reed. Here's his picture saying that there was no blood in the car when he luminoled it. And here's a statement from a letter to the governor. And guess what? It's not just Chuck Reed saying it. After Chuck Reed retired from the sheriff's department, Ricky Gardner took over. He was the second lead investigator. And Ricky Gardner says the same thing. He said it in a radio interview, 2013. Here you see it. He talks about how luminol shows even the slightest trace of blood, but there was no blood in the car. That's Ricky Gardner saying it. This is one of the few things that those two guys agree about. They both agree that the car was luminol tested, and they both agree that there was no blood found in the car. But now, decades later, I know some people out there are now saying, oh, maybe the luminol test was done wrong. Says who? Both of the lead investigators, Reed and Gardner, both say the luminol test was done right and there was no blood in the car. And that disproves my story. According to my story, there should have definitely been found blood in that car. And now, the grand finale. This one is going to rock your socks. I told the police, and here you see it in the transcript, that I cut myself at the crime scene. Well, if that had been true, the police should have found my DNA. But when DNA testing was performed, they did not find my DNA. I was excluded as a source. Here is a page from the DNA test. The entire DNA test is linked up in a separate video on DNA testing. I was excluded as a source. My DNA was not found at the crime scene, even though I said I cut myself. Can't be true. Here's something really cool. Take a close-up look. Here is 6FE. That is one of the blood samples that is type O. Where was that found? That's what's the key here, okay? Here's a police sketch. It's on the screen door to the house. You can see 6 right next to the door handle. 6FE is on the door handle. Now, here's a photograph of the front door, and you can see the main front door, and if you look closely on the left, you can see the screen door. It's open. So that's where that is. And here in the final shot, you see a close-up of the screen door handle. That, folks, that is 6FE. And that has to be the killer's blood, because it's going out of the house after the murders. And folks, that is not my DNA. It's not me saying it. It's the Department of Forensic Sciences. Simple as that. 6FE, the blood on that door, is not Jens Soering. Here it is again. Look at it. But if I'd been telling the truth, that should have been my blood, and it's not. The whole story is a pack of lies, which I told the police to save the woman I loved from execution. And that, folks, is how you do a real fact check.